Good morning, my name is Sudworth. I'm the CMO of NPAW, and today I'm standing in front of the booth of NPAW at the NAB 2023 in Las Vegas. I will be joined today by Kurt Rao, the CTO of Tegna, and I will discuss with them how they use video analytics in their daily business to improve the end user experience. Welcome, Kurt. Thank you very much for joining us today at the NAB.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Kurt, before we start, just give me a short overview about your career. So you joined Tegna 5 years ago, worked as a Chief Information and Technology Officer for a time, where you led the transformation growth of the media publishing organization into a global digital content platform company. Prior to Time Warner, you worked as a Vice President of Technology for NBCU's television, also as a founding member of Hulu.
Yes.
Responsible for developing the ad tech stack. And at the very beginning of your very impressive career, you started at Viacom and were responsible for the development of the technology portfolio. Before we come to your current tasks and responsibilities at Tegna, it would be great if you could give our audience a short overview about what Tegna exactly does. I know it's well known in the US, but maybe for our viewers in Europe and Asia, that would help.
Yeah. So Tegna is a local broadcaster. So in the US, what a local broadcaster does is has rights to broadcast television and sometimes radio across the country. So we have 64 television stations in cities like Dallas, Denver, Seattle, Atlanta. And, in those cities, we produce about, on average, 14 hours of content a day, right? It's news, weather, sports, local sports. And we distribute it across a multitude of platforms. So, over the air via an antenna, just your traditional television, on digital platforms, on cable, satellite, and then, as the world and the consumers move forward, right, increasingly on connected television. And so in all of these areas, we're producing and distributing content. That's the core of our business. We also have an ad tech business called Premium, where we monetize content, not only ours, but other providers, to get through the form of advertising, primarily to match local advertisers with consumers. Yeah, so I think they fall into a few buckets, right? The first one is, our core today continues to be linear television, right? That's where our largest audience is. And so in that space, it is all about how do you get more content, the right content in front of consumers, right? Similarly, in the digital space, as we continue to ramp up digital, right, the question we work with and what we try to solve for is, who are the consumers in digital? What's the kind of content that they look for? So relative to a broadcaster like an NBC or a network like NBC, we serve very local communities, right? So while there's national news and global content and global news, we're really focused on what really drives the communities, right, that we serve in. And so how do you make your content and in this case, news, really pertinent to, those small communities? The second set of challenges is, once you do all of this, what's the best way to monetize it, right? So we have a subscription model, we have an advertising model. So there you're trying to connect, your customers, which we call advertisers or, subscribers, to our content, right? How do you match that? And third, the big challenge is what is the future for us, right? As consumer demand changes, as their habits change, right? How do we make sure we are relevant, on a go-forward basis? And really, the way I think of this is, you have audiences today, you have audiences you don't know. How do you connect them? How do you get deeper with the, people today? And then how do you bring people in from the outside?
Okay, very interesting. So basically you use mainly analytics to understand your end users better and to know it better, who they are and how you can monetize them.
Yeah, and I'd say it maybe slightly differently is, again, multiple pillars. The first one is really to understand who your consumer is, right? What are they like? What's their profile? What's their household look like? What are their interests? The second is to really determine, right, why do they consume content from us, right? Why do they come to us? And how do you deepen that engagement, right? And then the third part is, is, are there others in a community, right? So if I think of, one of the advantages of being in local is you're serving a Dallas or a Seattle or an Atlanta, you know what that fixed population is, right? So if you have a population, I make that up, 2 million in Dallas, you know you can reach, a certain percentage, right? And they, again, deepen that engagement. Then you ask the question, what do you need to do to get others? Why do they go to your competitors? What's it that drives them there? And what is the opportunity to bring them onto your platforms? Yeah, it is absolutely critical, and it's our future, right? I mean, I think till you know this, if you go back, 5, 10 years, you always had data, right? You just didn't have the velocity of data that you had today, right? And so the challenge today is, I call it, how do you kind of sort of connect all these breadcrumbs, right? So you're collecting data from the exhaust of a DSP on the advertising side. You're collecting data when, consumers come to your websites or your CTV apps, right? But it's been next to impossible to put all of these together, right? And then really be able to make intelligent decisions around it, right? And so a lot of people have focused on, taking that data, and using it for things like personalization, but there's a lot more we could do if you had all of this data in one place and can make rational decisions, right? All the way up on, what content should we be producing.
So really about knowing the customer from the A to Z.
That's right. It's a journey. It's a customer journey, right? Right.
Yeah.
I don't think there's one single metric. I mean, so, you look at it from different perspectives, right? So in our world, we got, at least 3 big constituents, maybe more. The first one are the folks that are actually producing the content, right? And they need a set of metrics on, how engaged are the consumers, right? Why are they interacting with our content? What do we need to do to bring them on? Then you have what I call customers, which are your advertisers, right? And they're looking at it very differently, right? So we're looking at what are the interests that they have, what are their affinities, right? So as an example, do they belong to a household with children, right? Because the advertising message to them is going to be very different to someone that does not have, single parents or no kids in the household. And so we have a lot of segments that you try to address and reach on the backs of the same content, right? The third, I think, is the marketing angle, right? Which is, how do you market to those folks? How do you let them know that, in the next 24 hours, we got a special coming up, right? And those, what we call is on property, right? So if you're traditional, you already know they're coming to you, but then you have this opportunity of people that you do not, right? And so the metric for them is going to be very different in terms of how do I go acquire, right, new consumers, new customers, and bring them onto our platforms, right? And so we're thinking about that as, in these silos. Eventually, I think you may be right in that, you have to get to, is there one metric, right? And so sometimes people look at lifetime value or churn. Those are all things we look at, but I think very specifically, they are applicable in those 3 areas for us in a slightly different way. Yeah, so some of that I think comes organizationally, right? So what we have done, as an example, just from the technology team, right? We have lots of different groups that serve these customers, right? So internally, as an example, I have a team of folks that work with the content teams on what's the workflow solutions, how they produce content. Similarly, I have a team that's supporting the sales and the advertising process, and then a team on the marketing side. And so if you think of those as kind of sort of vertical areas, what we also then have is you got to look horizontally across. And so the data piece is a unified team that goes across all of those, right? Mm-hmm. And so in many ways, that team, I think, and when you look at engineers and data scientists, those are the folks that are able to look at the data being captured in those 3 areas and say, all right, how do I help the right set of people make decisions? Or when they ask questions, right, how does the data help them make the right set of decisions, right? And so you got to bring these 3 things together. So sometimes, and not everyone's going to be able to speak that language because they're all skilled differently, but you have to have people who can connect the dots and make those things happen. So I think one of the challenges for lots of large organizations, right, is some of them grow organically, some of them grow inorganically. We're no exception, right? So we've made, I talked about we have 64 stations, but in the last 3 years, we acquired 15 stations, right? And so when you acquire groups of stations like that, it takes time to kind of sort of normalize the tech stack, right? They come with their own infrastructure, they come with their own processes. So over time, we start to standardize things, but doesn't happen day one, right? The second part I'd say is, when we do put in infrastructure, like, what we're doing with NPAW, it's a one step, right? We start off fresh and it goes in, and then to the extent we acquire new products or new stations or new properties, we say this is the fabric we're going to standardize on. And so that it becomes a prioritization exercise, but we strive to get to a one-size-fits-all, right? So, one of the things that, even at Tegna, it's not possible all the time, but we use the expression, we got way too many snowflakes, right? So how do you bring things together, and then what makes the most sense? And, one of the expressions we use internally is, is the juice worth the squeeze, right? It's a very U.S. term for, right? But is it worth putting the investment in, and is there an ROI for it? Yeah, I think it's not a technical problem. That's a people and cultural problem, right? And a lot of times I'm very fortunate. I have the support of, our leadership team, right? And I think the mission of this company being to serve our local communities, it starts there, right? So everyone's kind of aligned on how do you do that, right? And then you peel the onion back a little bit and say to do that, you need a certain set of capabilities, whether it's around process, whether it's around tech. And I think, have been very fortunate in our structure that we do have a hybrid model where some things are standardized and centralized, and other things are regionalized, and then other things are localized, right? But I think a strong leadership and management team brings all of this together. And so we do have a lot of people at the corporate level and at the field that are able to be influencers on whatever we need to do, right? So I think, as you know, if you're trying to roll out a new piece of technology, the tech piece usually is easy, is getting the people to adopt it. And so you need, the folks on both sides to be advocates of what you're trying to do. Yeah, I think this is, again, we're somewhat early in this journey. Data is becoming a new currency, right? And so in our business, especially in media, we have data, our customers have data. When I think of the political process or political elections, and advertising is huge for us, they come with their voter registration data. So eventually you're trying to map these, right? So when I talk about trying to reach the right set of consumers, so if I have an auto dealership that has a customer base, right? They come to us and say, look, these are our customers. We want to send a message to them. And then they'll come to us and say, here are people that have come to our dealership but never really transacted. Can we send a different message to them, right? And so, in that case, we're sharing our data or their data and ours. We're combining it together, right, to create that unification. I think there's going to be more opportunities for that kind of stuff going forward, but we're still very early in that space. Yeah, again, we'll be very transparent. I mean, this I think is the holy grail that we're all going after. Right? There's a tremendous amount of data out there. The platforms like NPAW really help us digest that data. Right? Taking that data and creating a story is a whole different issue. Right? And a lot of times you got to know what questions to ask. Right? And so when I think of, you talk about the example, right, of the if it's an advertiser like an automobile, right, like a car dealership, we could produce a lot of data for them on who saw their ad, right, when they saw that ad, what program they saw it in, right. To take that and then to say, all right, of all the people that saw that ad, here's how many actually walked into your dealership. Here's how many of them actually converted, right. Those are that's the art of telling the story. Right? And so what we're trying to do is take all of the kinds of data that we get, put it into a platform like yours, and then how do we assess that, right, to make that journey, right? And make it easier for our salespeople to share that story with their customers. Similarly, which we're very hopeful on the NPAW side, is really looking at, on the consumer side, is taking that data, understanding what's the lifetime value of that consumer, right? What is the churn? And then how do you use that data again to tell our content people, right? Here's what the consumer is asking for, right? How do we deepen that engagement? They want more of this kind of information, less of this kind of information, right? And then you start to kind of sort of move that up the chain, which is, here are the topics that are really resonating with people. We need to produce more of this content, right? And then you start to think about, well, if they like this kind of content, what else would they like, right? So lookalike analysis. So those kinds of things, again, all come out of data, but someone's got to be able to take that data and create that story for someone to action on. Some of that I think is very driven by the gut, right? People in this business know their consumers, know their audiences, and so a lot of this I think has been really kind of sort of leaning in based on the gut. And when you didn't have this level of granular data, that was the best you could do, right? Today you have a lot more data, and I think the first step when you have this kind of data is really it reinforces what people have in their gut, right? The next part of the evolution, I think, is then to be able to go to some folks realizing that data is telling them a different story than what they thought was in their gut, right? And that's an evolution process, right? I mean, it's just like any new technology. As people adopt it, right, they start to realize they can do different things with the tech and the data that they have access to. All of us need platforms that are very flexible, right? So if you talk to 5 different broadcasters, we all probably have a very similar mission, but how we get at it is going to be very different. How your internal processes work is going to be very, very different, right? And so, you got to take that platform, or any platform for that matter, has to be able to kind of sort of meld into the way you operate, right? It's my personal belief it's much harder for organizations to change based on how a product or a system operates. Yeah. It's much easier if the system can mold into, right, the way you operate. And look, there's a happy medium there because, you don't want to over-customize things because it becomes a nightmare to manage. But at the same time, I think if it's a one-size-fits-all, adoption becomes very, very hard. Yeah.
It's great. That was it already. Thank you very much for joining us today, Kurt, and thank you very much for giving us these great insights about Tegna.
All right. Thank you, Tel. It's very nice to meet you, and it's been my pleasure.
Super.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed these, how I think, very interesting insights of Kurt Rao. Thank you very much for joining us. If you're interested to learn more about how video analytics can help your business to grow, visit our website on npaw.com, npaw.com.